tiptoes to my room every night, and just a sprinkle stardust and a whisper, go to sleep, everything is alright. I close my eyes, then I drift away into the magic night. I softly say a silent prayer, like dreamers do. Then I fall asleep to dream my dreams of you. In dreams I walk with you. In dreams I talk to you. In dreams you're mine. All of the time we're together. In dreams, but just before the dawn, I will wait and find you gone. I can't help it, I can't help it, if I remember that you said goodbye.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. That was the number that made me fall in love with Paul Pearson, right there. God, I didn't even know it. I thought I was gay, but apparently not. Because I was in love with him, so it was weird.
Right.
Hey, welcome, everybody. I'm Beth Muehling. This is
Sam Hartley.
And we are here representing Rocky Horror Picture Show #1 and...
#2.
That's right, #2. I'm not sure who got the bigger applause on that shit.
Felt like it kind of built, but
that kind of pissed me off. That kind of pissed me off.
Right.
Started this whole thing off bad.
bad.
You're still #1, Beth. Yeah, I'm a pisser. That's right. Listen, we are so grateful to Molly and Megan for letting us come up and do this tonight and be a part of all of your memories of Paul. You want to go ahead and start with yours?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Great. My first memory of Paul, working together in a show, was in 2002, Pinewood Bowl's production of West Side Story. Few things that I remember about it are sitting in a chair before the show, getting inches of spray plastered into my hair to fix his creations in the show, and then this force of nature performance as Doc that totally knocked me out every night and shook the walls of the bowl. The last show we worked on together was Rocky Horror #2.
The shit.
Huh.
I can't help it. Improv's my background.
Right,
I can't help
right. Stick to the script, Beth.
Shut up, Sam.
In 2009, I remember I finished my audition, and I made him laugh, which was the greatest sound that an actor could hope to hear. And he kind of sat there and smiled at me, and he said, you think you could handle the role of Frank? And I thought I was auditioning for the role of Brad. And I looked at him kind of puzzled and said, yes. And he recalled a performance of mine the summer prior of a musical traveling salesman. It was The Music Man, Beth.
That's weird.
That was, and I quote, less than palatable. Uh-huh.
Who said that? Wait, who said that?
Paul.
Paul, of course.
It was fine. And that a role like Frank would take a lot more work. It would have to be something more than a first instinct. It would have to be more than relying on saying the words and singing the songs. Paul had a keen eye for seeing more in all of us. Paul made us better. He made me better.
Good. You all right there, Beth? Paul did make him better. Sorry, I couldn't help that. That was just, it was like a softball right to me, man. I don't know what the hell. That's a setup. I have, like, pages of stuff about Paul that I was going to read to you, but fuck that. That's boring. I can, yeah, sure. There's so much, I've written this 100 times in my head, and I haven't read it. And, you know, had known Paul for over 40 years. I'm going to just tell you a couple of stories about him. The very first time I saw Paul was in a bar, gay bar called The Office on 21st and O Street. Yeah, office goers, all right. And if you had courage, you went in the front door. If you were, you know, a weenie like me, you go in the back door and hide, which is what I did. Throwing them out there. But I walked into this bar. It was the very first time I was in a gay bar. And I walked in, and there were these people up on stage singing, well, lip syncing, dancing, and it's humorous. And I thought, yeah, I want to do that. But I didn't know that that was Paul. I didn't know that. Until a couple of years later, he called me and he said, because I was busy working with Bridget and friends, and he said, you're Bridget? And I said, no, I'm Beth. And he said, this is Paul Pearson. And I'm like, uh-huh, okay. And he goes, you know, Buddy Star. I'm like, okay. Really hoping that he wasn't a bill collector. And he says, I have this crazy idea about doing a group, and I think you're right for it. And he's talking about Screaming Cupcakes. And I said, well, I'll come and meet you, and we'll talk about it. And I came over there, went to this table, and we have several people sitting around. She's a man. This is Zoot over here. This is Kelly Sheridan, who's going to be our dresser. I'm like, we have a dresser? We have a dresser? That's so awesome. And he goes, and this is my wife, Annie, and this is Molly and Megan, the two little ones running around, and this is their father. And I said, okay, what now? What was that? I said, can you elaborate on that? And so he did. Told me the whole story. And I said, you should be on Oprah. I said, really? Because this is like in 1980, 3 or something, some weird time like that. So we went out and we started the original Screaming Cupcakes, which was just the 4 of us, which was David, Paul, Rick, and myself. So I got to go out on stage against Bunny Lynn and Bunny Star and She's a Man and Beth. And I liked it that way. He kept wanting me to get a drag name. He was going to call me Lash LaRue, L-A-S-S-H, LaRue. And I said no. We had this argument over and over and over again, and finally I said, you know, Paul, I like being just Beth. So he brings on Keandra Elite and Nikki Flagg and Beth. All right, I'm cool with that. Anyway, we traveled around the country and did some stuff. Played over here in the gallery. Screaming Cupcakes sold out 3 nights in a row. We sold out on a Thursday night. We sold out that night at 6:30, but sold out that Friday and Saturday that night at 9:30. So, and this was like in 1980, I don't even know, 80 something. So you can't tell me Lincoln wasn't ready for some extremely good entertainment. And we went from there, and we went on, and we got to go to the Lead Center and perform for first night there, and we sold out 4 shows in 1 night. And we turned away about 2,000 people. So Lincoln isn't as not progressive as we may think. There are more stories and stories, blah, blah, blah. Then Paul gets this crazy idea that he wants to start a theater company. We'd been doing stuff for the Lincoln Ensemble Theater, and he was on the board of directors, I was on the board of directors, and he decided he didn't like doing board of director stuff, that he wanted to be an owner. So we decided that he wanted to start his own theater company. He was going to call it the Futz. And he wanted Rick and I to be a part of that with him. And I, as I did so many times with Paul, I was always be like, wait, what? What do you want to do? I was just always amazed by his thought process. And I wasn't going to do it until his wife, Annie, talked me into it. And what she said was, he needs this. He needs you. And those are the last words she ever said to me before she passed away. And that's why I became a part of the Futz. And then I got to direct the Futz's very first play, which was Search for Signs of Intelligent Life in the Universe, which I'm still looking for. Especially now. My God. And Chet, who you'll hear from today, was our Trudy. It was awesome. So I was always he was such a giving guy. I mean, that's so gracious that he starts this theater company and he's the artistic director, but he lets me direct the first play. And he had never seen me direct except for Ladies of the Evening and Bridget and Friends and stuff like that. So he didn't know. But for him to do that to me is like one of the greatest gifts of all time. And a couple of shows into the Futz Theater, he and I parted ways. We didn't see things the same. I couldn't catch his vision all the time. It's hard to catch a star, right? It's really hard. That's hot. And I couldn't catch his vision, and so I walked away from it for a while and walked away from Paul for a little bit until Channing Roos called me and said, hey, I need help down here at the Futz Theater doing some tech for his play. And so I went down and did the play, and I looked at Paul, and Paul looked at me, and we were right back where we started. We were just fine. We never even talked about it again. The Futz went on and did so many incredible things. He was really into doing subliminal stuff. He was really into doing socially relevant and irreverent things. He loved that kind of thing. And man, were we ready to hang on to him for that ride, because it was a hell of a ride when you were with Paul Pearson. We all of us, and you're going to hear some stories tonight, that will undoubtedly end in the same fashion. That Paul inspired me. Paul gave me permission to be me. He heard me, and he loved doing those things. He loved that. And that is Paul's legacy. Paul loved to shock people, as you all know. So all I can say to his afterworld is clear. Thanks. We're going to have some speakers now, about 37 of them. And so we should be out of here no later than 4 a.m. Right?
Right.
Right. And we're going to kind of call you up and have you kind of sit up here like when you're on deck, the baseball term. But first of all, the person that we want to hear from first is Paul Pearson.
There we go. This feels like it's in my face. Here, is this okay? Okay. In this photo, you see Paul on the left. My mom, Annie, is in the middle. My sister, Megan, on the right. And our biological dad, David, is holding me. It is not the best photo of any of us. In fact, my sister was super pissed off that day because she got home too late from the swimming pool and she didn't have time to shower off and fix her hair. But this photo is sacred to me. It hung on the wall of the Ritz, the tongue-in-cheek nickname for our house on 13th Street. It is one of only 2 photos ever taken of all 5 of us. I was born in 1987. Dad died of AIDS-related illness in 1989, followed by Mom in 1994. This photo is from the 2-year drop in the bucket of time that we were all together. We went from a family of 5 to 3, and after my sister left without a trace for several years, we were down to 2, Paul and me. Paul and I spent a tremendous amount of time together, more than what I imagine most parents and children do. One reason was simply a practical one. After he would lock up Fringe and Tassel for the day, he would spend 5, 6, sometimes 7 nights a week working on overlapping shows and projects. We couldn't afford a babysitter, so I would always tag along. But part of our constant togetherness was my own need, my own attachment. In the immediate years after Mom died, I had a habit of blurting out of nowhere, apropos of nothing at all, "I love you." Watching TV, the moment it cut to a commercial, "I love you." The frozen food aisle at the grocery store, "I love you." Sitting in the car at a red light on the way to yet another rehearsal, "I love you." Of course, he always said it back. For a while, I would literally follow him from room to room in our house. I had to be near him. I had to see him. I had no idea I was doing this until one day he stopped and said to me that I didn't need to follow his every move, that I could be alone for a few minutes and not to worry, he would always be nearby. Once, he was reaching across me to grab something off the table that was next to the chair I was sitting in, and without thinking, my hand shot out and grabbed his and squeezed. At first, I took him so off guard, he started to laugh and explained that he was just grabbing the TV remote, but then he saw the look on my face, and he felt the urgency of my grip, and he wrapped me in a hug. It feels a little absurd, even a little embarrassing to say all of this out loud, but I think of my fragile state at 7, 8, 9 years old. Mom and Dad were gone forever. Soon, Meg would also be gone, and I would have no idea if or when she was coming back. I couldn't stand the thought of Paul leaving me too. Paul gave me a feeling of safety I knew nowhere else. I was bullied at school, and if you were a kid from a family like ours in the 90s, you would have been too. But Paul built and maintained a world for me that centered freedom, curiosity, and being true to oneself. In countless ways, Paul was an outstanding parental figure to me. And it wasn't just me. He was a cherished mentor to so many young people, many of whom fill the seats tonight or who are tuning in on the live stream. I consider it a priceless gift to have been raised by him. And there were things about our life together that were painful, traumatic even. Paul struggled with depression his entire life, but most palpably in the years after Mom died. Once in the summer of 2001, I found a suicide note, although as far as I know, he never followed through with an actual attempt. If you got to experience the Ritz, the household that the three adults in this photo created together, then you know what we all lost when Mom and Dad died. While everyone felt their absence deeply, I think it's safe to say that no one experienced it the way that Paul did. Some of you know this, and some of you don't, so to clear the air, Paul struggled with hoarding. And that's not just a hyperbolic way of saying that our house was a little cluttered or messy. In the years after Mom died, our house filled with more and more stuff, lying in piles on every available surface. As the collection of costumes, props, books, movies, music, set pieces, and weird knickknacks continued to grow, so did the piles of trash and dirty dishes. Our house was literally crumbling and buckling at the foundation. By the time I graduated high school and moved away for college, we were living in squalor. While it was the death of my mom in 1994 that ultimately triggered his compulsive hoarding, there was more to it than that. Through his entire adulthood, Paul experienced death after death after death of family members, beloved friends, and lovers. Both of his parents within 1 year of each other, his senior year of college, and he never did graduate because of it. Kathy Lars, Ace Rochek, Jim Steenson, Rusty Franklin, John Paul Zudermeister, lovingly known as Zoot, Renee Kushner, Tom Youngblood, Kelly Sheridan. I could go on. The causes of death he witnessed were traumatic in their own right. AIDS, suicide, alcoholism, cancer, stroke. 2 friends of his in the 70s were murdered. Again, I could go on. My whole life, Paul would talk openly with me about all of the death he witnessed and the grief that he carried. And some of the losses he experienced, I too experienced in my own way. So as Paul's health declined over the last 10 years or so, I thought that I would be prepared for his death. I knew it would be hard, of course, but losing Mom and Dad early on were the practice rounds for losing Paul. And besides, I'm not a fragile little kid anymore. But I was so naive. I was not prepared at all. I reflect on how I have felt these past several weeks since Paul died, and I can hardly fathom that Paul must have felt something like this over and over and over. Paul's love was big, and this means that his grief was also big. If I loved and lost the way that Paul did at the frequency that he did, it would fuck me up too. Over time, his struggle with depression and hoarding has come to make sense to me. Paul began to cling to objects, to stuff, as proof of life, much like the way I clung to him, following him from room to room, blurting out, "I love you." I wish so badly I could blurt it out to him one more time. A few months before he died, in a phone conversation, he said to me that he had been reflecting on his life, and he wondered if he could have applied himself more. I'm dead serious. That is a direct quote. In fact, I think I texted my sister immediately after we hung up, like, can you believe? Yeah, we were like, okay. But in that moment, on the phone, I imagined him sitting alone in his small apartment, oxygen machine buzzing away, no savings, no assets, just the dregs of the previous month's Social Security deposit in his checking account, surrounded by piles and piles of his stuff. His comment took my breath away and broke my heart. I reminded him over the phone that applying oneself is a highly subjective thing, and that in my eyes, he applied himself more than just about anyone I know. Because after all, it was Paul Pearson who, after years of organizing underground drag shows in living rooms, basements, and hotel ballrooms, became the first drag queen to perform on the stage of the first gay bar in the city of Lincoln in 1978. And it was Paul Pearson who went on to form the innovative and legendary Screaming Cupcakes, blending drag, theater, vaudeville, and pop culture sensibility. And while they may be out there, I don't know of any other drag troupe that was invited to perform at their city's official New Year's Eve celebration, hosted by the mayor, ringing in 1991 with a bang. It was Paul Pearson who was the founding artistic director of the Futs, a tiny 40-seat black box theater in the Mission Arts Building. From 1994 to 1999, Paul produced daring, cutting-edge, avant-garde theater, giving actors, designers, and periodic guest directors opportunities they couldn't find anywhere else in town, or sometimes even the state or the Midwest. Through the Futs, Paul developed his reputation as, quote, the local counterculture theater guru, as described by Lincoln Journal-Star reviewer Larry Kubert. It was Paul Pearson who directed the Beatrice Children's Theater summer shows for 10 years, where he nurtured the creative potential of dozens and dozens of young people, watching many of them grow up over the course of a decade. It was Paul Pearson who was awarded the inaugural Founders Award from Star City Pride in 2018, an important acknowledgement of his lifetime of queer community building, artistry, and fearless risk-taking. It was Paul Pearson who, in 2022, joined a select few as an official Lincoln Community Playhouse Legend honoree, with a total of 22 acting roles, 64 hair, makeup, and costume design positions, and 12 directing credits here at the Playhouse, dating back to 1981. Not to mention all of the one-off guest lectures at summer theater camps, high schools, college courses, the one night only DIY drag and theater projects in the back rooms of bars and art galleries, the summer evenings spent performing in Flatwater Shakespeare productions, and the fundraisers he organized for the earliest HIV services and LGBTQ resource hotlines in the entire state, and more and more and more. Paul always gave more. So yes, I certainly think he applied himself. And he did it in a place that matters, Nebraska. He never did try to make it big in Chicago or New York City. In fact, he never even visited New York once in his life. Once, one of his great loves, Ace Rochek, asked him to move away with him to the gay Mecca of San Francisco, but Paul said no. As Paul told a reporter with the gay print publication The Advocate, who was passing through town in 1981, you can get away with a lot in Lincoln. And did he ever? The video you saw of Paul being a total dreamboat at the beginning of the program was from the 1988 Screaming Cupcake show titled Just Desserts. Paul was wearing this very jacket, which my mom, Annie, designed and sewed herself. My dad, David, performed in the show too, along with all of the members of the Screaming Cupcakes. At the very end, in his closing remarks, Paul said the following: "The theme of this show tonight has been one of freedom. And if there's anything we wanted to say, it's that we believe that freedom is the time now. Freedom from oppression, sexism, racism, freedom from disease, freedom from anything that keeps us down and from being who we are. If we've learned anything while doing these shows and being together and acting freely together and expressing our thoughts, it's that you cannot wait for someone to promise you freedom. For if they promise you freedom, they're just a Twinkie and drag handing you a ho-ho and bondage." If you want freedom, you have to be the screaming cupcake that says, "Give it to me," and take it for yourselves. Paul was that screaming cupcake who demanded freedom, and he held the door wide open for all to join him there. There will never be another person quite like Paul Pearson. Understatement of the year. In his memory, I challenge us all, myself included, to keep taking freedom. Annie, David, and Paul would want that for all of us. Thank you.
Please welcome Megan Pearson.
Name's Lara now, but yeah, I'm a Pearson. My name's Megan. Some people in this room I've known for my entire life, or close to it. Others I have met briefly, and some not at all. I attended many local drag shows in the 80s, though my first was in 1979 at 2 days of age. I hung out at a lot of play rehearsals in the 90s at various locations. But apart from a school play in the 4th grade, I have never been on stage. I am the Pearson daughter with gripping stage fright. So hello! I'm also wearing one of Paul's shirts, so I just thought I'd mention that. So growing up, our house, as she mentioned, was called the Ritz. It was adorned by a plaque on the front door. It was vibrant. It was a lively place full of love and community, built with intention, just like our family. I was lucky enough to have 3 parents, and Paul was the most fun. We connected hard over music and movies as far back as I can remember. Not many kids see Watership Down when they're like 4. It's still one of my favorite movies of all time, and the song is haunting. So after the death of my dad, David, in 1989, and my mom, Annie, in 1994, the Ritz changed, and it became a place bursting with wonderful, cherished memories. This photo, taken probably in 94 or maybe 95, the Pearson family was known for being strange at the Olin Mills portrait studio in town. We showed up every year or about every year. If somebody had crutches, they were in the photo. We would select an odd arrangement of props and then just use them, usually to the absolute horror of the photographer. They would give us an idea for a shot, and Paul would stand up and start moving us around or handing us things to hold or lean against. And he commanded the photography studio the same way that he would lead a play rehearsal. You could see the ideas just pouring into his mind as he looked at the props and then peeked at the different background options. The photographer most often would be laughing with us by the end. Paul was the king of awkward family photos before they were cool. This was the last time that the Pearson family entered a photography studio together. For me, it marks the end of an era. We were learning to be a family together, just us. At this time, I did not know that our lives would change even more, forever. I did not know that there would be no more Christmas trees. I did not know that we would lose clean surfaces for preparing food. I did not know how many times CPS would be called, or that the friends who called them would then show up and help correct the infractions that had been incurred. I did not know that friends we considered family would swing by a few more times to check in and then stop coming by altogether. I didn't know that the set pieces, props, costumes, and piles upon piles of everything that he brought into the house was not going to move or be put away. But Paul loved his stuff. It was fun for him to accumulate it, but it was also necessary for his work in theater, drag, and his 20-year career at Fringe and Tassel. His collection was vast, it was eclectic, and he was constantly adding to it all. He just did not have a plan for what to do with it once he had it. Paul had suffered from chronic depression for a long time, and in 1994, it was fueled by overwhelming grief that came with the loss of his wife, his person. Paul never seemed to give up hope for the future, but he would give up on certain things entirely. He could be wildly positive in moments of hardship and can just somehow keep going, staring his struggles right in the face. I lost my place. There we go. We did not, these are out of order. That was 2, 3. So I was 14, 15, and 16 years old. My mom had died, and I was pissed about it. Then I watched my environment go from a bright, awesome, loving space to a grimy, dark shell of what once was. It was a lot. Paul and I clashed often over the state of the house, and I decided that I had to go. I moved out one day while he was at work and Molly was at school. And leaving my sister behind broke me into pieces, because I am 8 years older than her, but I had no idea how to even consider taking her with me. Years later, she remembered my email address and she reached out, and I was so glad that she did. Paul and I didn't speak for about 7 years. I finally called him up one day and I asked if he'd like to meet me for dinner. We met. We acknowledged our faults in a very indirect, roundabout ways. We apologized to each other, and that was that. We did not speak about specific incidences or try to hash anything out. We left it right where it was and moved past it. And shortly after that is when he had to move out of the Ritz. Over the years, as his health and abilities declined, he would call us for help when needed. And asking for help is hard. It was always just a little bit too late, and it was always kind of an emergency. He needed help once because his clothing and stuff had piled up so much he couldn't shut the bedroom door. His window AC unit worked well, but the room wouldn't stay cool with the door open, and he was having a hard time breathing due to the humidity. Another time, the apartment he lived in had changed owners, and upon inspection, he was told that the fire department required 3 feet of space throughout for walking and entry into a living space. We arrived, and we rearranged everything with measuring tapes in hand. Depression isn't something that can just be pushed aside, and grief has to go somewhere. And I think that it was pretty amazing that he was able to funnel all that energy into something that he was so passionate about and that he loved very much, which was his art and his entertainment. That's an incredibly difficult thing to do. Paul was one of those brilliant, tortured minds, similar to the likes of Robin Williams. If Paul was feeling a certain kind of way, he would really feel it, and he would sit with it. He would get to know it. His movie or music selections would reflect it. He was empathetic to a fault, and he wore his heart on his sleeve, and Paul was always real. Paul was an amazing human being, and I loved him very much. I mentioned that Paul would call for help, often too late. In 2020, when he was intubated in the ICU over New Year's, he had no choice but to accept the help that we offered this time before he was able to ask us. We formulated a plan and set it into motion, unsure of what his reaction would be when he was extubated. He needed to move, and his apartment had stairs. He couldn't go back there. Turns out he was relieved. He allowed us to move all his things into a new apartment when he was not able to oversee our work because he had to keep an eye on his stuff. He let us into his space regularly. He let us clean up his kitchen and do his dishes, among other things. Some of Paul's life was very uncomfortable to be a part of and to observe, and while he didn't seem concerned about really basic creature comforts, we were for him. It was nice to see him finally living in a space that didn't feel so scary and where he could be safe. It was a joy to be able to provide him with care when it was needed, and I'm so glad that he actually let us. He deserved the world because he did make it better for everyone when he was able. I visited Paul the day before he passed away. He was in hospice, and he was very calm. He was relaxed, and he was more comfortable than I had seen him in over 20 years. There was no coughing and no catching his breath and no struggling of any kind. He was able to talk with my husband and I for an hour straight, and it was glorious to see him just chilling without a care in the world. My sister Molly and I would like to thank everyone who donated to the Paul Pearson Memorial and those who attended the big gay yard sale. We couldn't have done this without you. He accumulated so much stuff over the years, and once he was gone, we were faced with emptying his space. He loved all those things so much, and he also loved all of you. It seemed fitting to share his wacky collections with the community that he cherished. Molly and I have lovingly and sometimes begrudgingly cared for those items for 25 plus years. Even though it was a lot of work and a lot of frustration, doing so for him was a labor of love. And I want you guys to know that when I was typing this on my phone, that auto-corrected to lobotomy of love, and I can hear his laughter echoing through this room. Last Thursday, I finished emptying Paul's apartment. The very last of the costumes, props, and odds and ends were taken to the thrift store. The Goodwill on 17th Street is going to have a hell of a Halloween display this year. And as I closed the door one last time on his location, I was hit with loads of emotions. And the only way I could really figure out how to put it into words is to say that now I feel like I can really grieve the loss of my entire family, what we were, what we had hoped we could be, and Paul.
Say, what the hell? These two girls. I mean, what the hell? Everything they've done and everything they've been through and all the work I know that you did to take care of him is greatly appreciated by us who love him. So thank you. One of the things that we forgot to announce earlier, we are streaming this live. So where's the camera? Hello, streaming cupcakes. Yeah, see, I wrote that one. That never does work. All right, we're transitioning over now to some invited speakers that Megan and Molly have chosen to speak tonight. And the first of those, well, we're gonna kind of point to you, kind of look at us. We have you on deck, sitting up here, so that we're not making these fine people wait for us so much. But the very first person is somebody that I mentioned earlier, Nikki Flagg or Nancy Buhrmann.
Thank you, Beth. Well, Molly said, dress in the honor of Paul. He loves sequins. When I heard about the passing of Paul, the first thought that went through me was like, no. I had just rearranged my schedule. I live in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, to come down and spend some time with Paul. But almost immediately, as soon as I got that thought, I got the biggest smile on my face, and this emotion of warm, fuzzy love just filled my body. And you know what I thought? The trio is back together again. Because that's how I met him. Well, and the two little ones. Oh, and there's stories to tell about them, but that's another time. But that's how I met Paul and Annie and David. And they were the most loving, non-judgmental. Well, Annie could be a little judgmental. No, I need to rephrase that. Annie could be a little judgmental if I was screwing up. That's a better way to put it. But you don't understand this family. It was like Megan was saying, there was so much love and light. And I don't care if you came at 8 o'clock in the morning or 10 p.m. at night. Somebody was there to offer you a cup of coffee or a glass of iced tea and an ear and a hug. So you feel pretty safe there, don't you? So when Paul Pearson comes up to you and says, hey, Nancy, I think you'd make a good human hors d'oeuvre. You know how a German shepherd cocks its head when it doesn't understand you? I'm like, what? Oh, you'll be perfect. Don't worry about it. I'll tell you all about it later. Okay, well, I trust him, right? Yeah. So I go to the bar, the office lounge. Thank God for Karen Bowen. She was the bartender, so I knew the bar was clean. And Paul hands me this string bikini and says, here, now go put this on and then come lay on the bar. What? No, come on. I'm going to, have platters, right? No, you are the hors d'oeuvre. Paul, you said this was going to be fun. Okay, so again, trusting family. Listen, I laid on that bar in that string bikini with Hostess Ho-Ho, strawberries, grapes, chocolate, whipped cream. And not everybody used their hands, if you get my drift. But you see, that was the uncanny ability that Paul Pearson had. He just didn't look at somebody. He could look in somebody. And he could pull out of you what you didn't even know existed. And I got to be a member of the Screaming Cupcakes for a while, and I want to tell you that was one of the best groups you could be in, because not only did they push you to be better than what you were yesterday, they were also there to pick you up if you fell. And that's how I remember Paul Pearson, full of love, and yet he could just grind you to get you to that spot. And then he'd look at you like, I don't know why you're surprised. I knew there all the time. I knew it was there. So I'm just going to say it again. It is hard for me to be sad that Paul is gone, because this is how I remember him, the three with Megan and Molly. And can't you see him up there? Oh, I bet Bunny and Buddy are already having a show for God. And Annie is already at the sewing machine. So as I leave you tonight, just know that he was one in a million. And I'll be forever honored and privileged that I got to call them family. Thank you.
So we have a few invited guests that couldn't be here tonight. I'm going to read their statements for them. The first up is Channing Roos. Rocky one. My theater stepdad, Paul Pearson of Lincoln, Nebraska, died last month after a life of righteous subversion, drag, theater arts, single parenthood, and the most famous laugh in town. I was in and out of college, and when I was out, I interned with Paul, learning about the art of camp, comedy, sight gags, prop humor, bad taste, obscenity, beauty, insanity, and love. You can't take a class in camp in theater school, or what he called spectacle, and it was free for anyone who wanted to volunteer to learn. Before I forget, nobody will probably mention that Paul was an excellent music director and edited all the audio for Screaming Cupcakes, bar shows, his own plays, using just a turntable and a double cassette deck, at least in the early years. Paul was the first person to cast me on stage in Lincoln in Psycho Beach Party at the Lincoln Ensemble Theater as an airheaded beach bum. It was the beginning of a long list of lovable, harebrained characters, including a drag persona known as Carol Hazerfarmer. See? Rocky 1. Right. I'm sorry. He invited me to direct Vampire Lesbians of Sodom for the short-lived Lincoln Ensemble Theater. He asked my advice when he was choosing a space for the celebrated Futz Theater. I said yes, which not everyone agreed with, even after it opened. He invited me to join the Screaming Cupcakes, his gender-bending lip-sync musical comedy performance art troupe. He invited me to become a part of his extended family of wackos, geniuses, and malcontents. During Vampire Lesbians of Sodom rehearsal, I was freaking out about my Lincoln directorial debut, and a recent partner had died. Paul had to give me the coaching, you can do this. You've already proven you can, you just do it again. He found the support for me, though his wife of many years had just recently died as well. It was the kind of typical father-son, gender-bending performance art, vampire lesbians pep talk that happens every day in red-blooded heartland of America. I was learning about commitment in acting class, and Paul gave me plenty of things to practice committing to, including playing a ditz, a young Edith Bunker-type character, a virgin who became an S&M top in the space of 3-minute number, a lovable hick, a hair farmer, and a cross-dressing robot lounge singer. Paul gave those around him the space to find themselves, accept themselves, and be themselves. He opened doors and hearts and pushed boundaries that so desperately needed to be pushed. He was also single-handedly responsible for so many of the places and faces and expressions that you need to be a real city and to be real people. A lot has been said about Paul's ability to both see and extract the gifts he saw in people around him. In my case, Rick Swank, who performed in drag as She's a Man, had cast me in a meller-drammer. It's important for me that you know that he spelled out meller-drammer as the ugly, awkward anti-ingenue. I played her as a young and frumpy Edith Bunker type with high hair that bounced as she did her little trot. Paul watched my performance and said, "I think we found the real you." Thanks, Paul. I want to end with a call to action. Paul's body is gone, but his spirit is somewhere, and somewhere inside all of us who were lucky enough to cross his crooked and wonderful path. Injustice, ignorance, bigotry, and worse still exist in the world. The struggle is not over, but Paul gave us some very powerful tools in which to massage the hearts in the direction of fun, joy, love, and unapologetic laughter. Paul Pearson didn't push the envelope. He licked the envelope. Thank you for everything, Paul. I will now be reading a monologue as Ward Lewis. In 1982, Paul changed my life and kept me close. He keeps changing my life. So many wonderful memories with such love and wonderful life experiences. I love Paul so much, and I miss him. Thank you, Paul. Thank you all. I love you all. The crew from Fringe and Tassel, please help me welcome our next invited guest, Chet Kincaid.
Hello. I'm going to get naked. Now I'm in full drag, baby. When Channing texted me that he wasn't going to be able to be here, and I told him I would be in drag, he said, knock 'em dead. And then he said, maybe that's not appropriate. So I texted back, Paul would love it. Kelly Sheridan gave me this lovely wig, but Paul gave me my highly inappropriate but hilarious drag name. He made it up on the spot with no forethought. He saw me in a drag outfit similar to this lovely thing, and here it is. My name is Chet, so it was Conchetta. Oh, that makes sense. I like that. De la Rosa. Ooh, that's nice. I like that. Alabasco de Gumbo. So we got some chocolate Cajun in there too, but Conchetta de la Rosa Alabasco de Gumbo is a good drag name. In the hospital, every time a new nurse came in, they'd want to know how I was associated with Paul. So I would say, well, he's been my boyfriend, my husband, my racist on a bus, my grumpy 1880s Swedish ship passenger. I'd been the redheaded mother of his body-switching ingenue. I'd washed his feet. He beat me up, and then we fell in love. Of course, all of this was on stage or in video, either acting with or directing each other. In real life, I've known Paul for over 40 years, admiring his many talents as much as all of you. The last several years, several people helped him to medical appointments. Gwen Cook is the one got me started. She wanted to be here so bad, but she's on her honeymoon in London. So, yeah, but many people helped him out. But I was really, really happy to do so because the ride was usually long, and I waited with him in the waiting room, and we discussed Netflix, music, politics, philosophy, life histories, the stepdaughters he was so proud of, you name it. And I will miss those chats. The last time I saw Paul was the same day Megan did, the day before we lost him in the hospital, and he was in such a good mood. No pain, no nervous twitches. He was breathing better. He was eating double entrees. And we heard a hospital ding, ding. And we both started singing One Less Bell to Answer. And he told me about Barbara's version that I shamefully had never heard. So I found it on YouTube and asked if we should play it. He said, oh, yes. So as Babs crooned, Paul closed his eyes, smiled, and swayed. Then he started to lip sync. Hardly able to sit up, but the drag in him could not help it. Perfect lip structure, big, elegant gestures. It was fabulous. I love you, Paul. Yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bob Esquivel.
Thank you. I apologize for that. I messed up my entrance. God. As though that's never happened before. This picture was taken in 1983. And I remember that picture, and I value that picture because that's the first day, really, that I met Paul Pearson. We were doing a film for Nebraska Educational Television under the direction of Chet, Kincaid. And she had very graciously cast me, and I somehow just really lucked out and wound up getting a wonderful, wonderful role. And I was in a lot of scenes and stuff, and this is one of them. This is where Raul, the gentleman with the mustache, me, when I had hair, and he's on his way to work, his first day of work. He and his family, that included 6 children, came to America looking, trying to escape the horrors of his life in a generic Latin American country. Never did tell us what that was. It was just a country. And anyway, it was a fascinating show. It was a lot of fun to do, and it took us a year, on and off with different days of shooting. This day was when we were on the bus going to work, my wife and I. Now, she's not her name was Yolanda, and Yolanda was sitting next to me during that scene. But, it was like the whole day. If you've, done anything in front of a camera, it can just take forever for a scene that is going to be here and gone before you know it. Well, anyway, we sat on that bus, Lincoln, a transportation bus, and went up and down the streets for the whole day while they shot this scene. Paul was the racist bully. I apologize, I cannot remember the name of the gentleman, the other young man who was in that show. At that moment. It was in that one scene. But Paul, one of the things I've got to say is that I was very new at, I'd done some theater, but I'd never been in front of a camera. And that was like, this was going to be a wonderful experience because I loved film, and I knew that there was a certain way you have to approach being in film when you're acting. And I knew that there was all these different things that you have to be considering all the time. But the deal was that Paul was saying some really horrible, horrible racist things to Raul on the bus. And Raul has no idea what this guy's saying to him. And Paul was doing this kind of an interesting smirk as he delivered these lines, which kind of fooled Raul into thinking that, oh, maybe he's being nice. I don't know. What's the deal here? And so the whole scene, I had no lines, and everything I had to do was all happening in my face based on what Paul was giving me with his face, but I'm trying my best not to listen to what he's saying, just what he's giving me physically. And Paul gave me so much to work with that it was just great. I mean, I loved doing that scene because of the fact that he just said volumes with his eyes and with his face and his snarling and his smirking and the whole thing. And then there's just one moment as he's leaving the bus where he does actually put his hand on me. And it kind of, I was like, uh-oh, what's going to happen now? But then he left the bus. But it was all that day, though, he and I, when we weren't acting, had wonderful conversations. We'd never met before. And we talked about movies and talked about plays and we talked about music and all the things that we had in common that our relationship through the years was built on. And so as time went by, we kept in touch and we did different things. And I think the first thing I remembered was that Paul, I know he loved music, as you all know, and he had such eclectic taste, and he had this massive record collection. And more importantly, he knew the difference that music makes in a production, that scenes can just be made or broken sometimes by the music that brings on the scene or is being played during the scene, or And he knew all that. He understood all that. And he had such a massive command of music. He knew weird versions of songs that you never run across. The first time I wound up using that was when I was directing a show at the Spigot Bar in the back room of the Spigot. And it was a song that a fellow by the name of Denny Dauberstein and I produced, and I directed the show. Chet was in it, Paul was in it, and Jim Cook was in it. Excellent performers. I mean, they did a fabulous job, and it was a very weird, quirky show. About a guy and his very macho, very brutal sort of a guy who has this garage, and he dabbles in strange things that he makes. And one of the things that's played by Jim, and one of the things he made was this electronic device that he believed he could cure Paul's character by hooking him up to this machine, and that Paul would no longer be. I wasn't really sure what it was that Paul's character had that was a problem, but he was very, very, very backwards and very, very, very timid, and he was just like what do we do now, George? Kind of a thing with Jim Cook's character. Well, anyway, I said I need to find some kind of a bizarre song for that, and Paul says, "How about Shock the Monkey?" You remember Shock the Monkey? I know, with Peter Gabriel, I believe. And I went, wow, yeah, that's a perfect song to use, in that part of the show. Shock the Monkey, cool. And then he said, you wouldn't believe it. I know a version that's in German. Well, that's all I had to hear. And I went, okay, that's the one we're going to use. I don't know who's doing it, but he played it for me, and I said, yes, that's the one I want, the one that's in German. So it was Schock den Ab and Schock den Ab, and we used that. And I realized then, this guy knows so much about music and about performances and all the rest of that I really have to take advantage of it. And I did over the years as I was directing things, just checking in with him and saying, what would you put in this part of the show? I directed on another play called Fools Rush In that we did in the gallery, and Paul was actually in that one, but he found me a piece of classical music for a scene that was a deer hunt scene, and it was like our young actors dressed as deer hunting other young actors, who were dressed as hunters, and they were, going back and forth, and they had these guns that were plungers, toilet plungers, and then there was trees that were the forest. I mean, this is a pretty good sized cast for that little space, and they all were up there taking tree poses, and before they went on, they covered their bodies with balloons. And so as one of the actors with the plunger would come up and aim it and go, they would have pins and they would pop the balloon. You hear this, boom. And they'd chase these deer throughout. Well, we needed a piece of music to cover some of that because it was fun, yes, but we knew that, a song could make or break it. And there was a piece of classical music that I know that as a kid I'd heard millions of times on Looney Tunes. And it was like many different Looney Tunes cartoons. And Paul says, you remember that song? And I went, no, I don't think I do. And then he played it for me, and I went, oh, God, yes, I do remember that. It was on a par with that, where they're building buildings and stuff, But it wasn't that one, but it was very similar to that. I have no idea what classical composer did it. We used that, and my God, it just sold that scene. And we played, the whole piece, and choreographed that deer hunt scene to go with that song. And again, I would never have done that way had I not found Paul and had taken advantage of his knowledge and what piece of music to pull out to use. So anyway, there was that one. There was that was a really important one there, but after he opened the FUTS, and that was like a landmark thing for me. I mean, I loved that because we had an opportunity to do some theater, some scripts that, were sort of like Battery, very, very bizarre scripts. And he came to me one day and said, I've got this script called All in the Timing. And at the time, nobody knew anything about All in the Timing. It was a collection of little one-acts, little short one-acts. And it had a cast, I decided I wanted it to be a cast of like a half a dozen people, men and women, and that they would play different parts throughout. And it turned into a really successful production. But there was music that had to go with that Paul gave me wonderful suggestions for. And of course, he was running the FUTS at the time, and we did the show, and it went over very, very, very well. And it was just a really fun thing to do. And it took 2 or 3 years before I saw that the university was going to do it. So we beat him to the punch by a few years. That was great. And that was because Paul knew, not only did he know a good script, but he also knew who to go to take it. And he handed it to me, and he said, I know you can do a great job with this. This is just up your alley. And I went, well, okay. So I read it, and I thought, yep, he's right again. This is something I've got to do. So that was that particular experience that we did at the FUTS while he was there. And I knew when it was going well because, again, as so many people have mentioned, that cackle from the audience during rehearsal told me, yep, that joke sold. That's great. And it was always fun to hear that cackle out there because then I had more confidence about, yeah, I'm going the right way with that joke. That's good. One of the other odd things that happened at that time, we had both been working with Lincoln Ensemble Theater, too, prior to the time that he opened the FUTS. And we were doing a melodrama. I love that somebody said that because that was the original term I heard. I think part of it was because I used to say, well, melodramers are the bastard son of the theater. And so we used to do some really amazing mellers that were topical and made a lot of reference to local issues as well as national issues, and they were just campy and fun. The first one we did was a thing called She Was Only a Farmer's Daughter, and then we subtitled it, at least in rehearsal, She Was Only a Farmer's Daughter, but all the horse manure. That was it, but all the horse manure. Well, anyway, and then Paul, of course, would cackle, so that was, that worked out. Well, anyway, we were doing another one that was going to be played at the Burlington station. And we were using Lincoln Ensemble Theater, which was upstairs of the Creamery, for changing costume, but for getting ready for the show. And I had begged and begged and begged, and I'd asked Paul, would you do drag again? And at that time, he was saying, no more. He says, look at me. I'm getting old, I'm getting fat. He goes, the last thing anybody wants to see me do is drag. And I said, Paul, I had this idea, and I really know you'd be great with this. And I said, I got a friend who's writing the script, and I said, I wonder if maybe you'd consent to doing it as kind of a Mrs. Marple meets Dame Edna. So we're talking about the detective being this old female detective. And instead of the usual, Sam Spade kind of guy that was sort of stereotypical to make it work, this was who we were using for that. Well, okay, Paul was getting ready, and he had on his big sequined platform shoes, and he was all in drag, and we had to walk from the Creamery over to the Burlington station. Now, it was in early winter, and as early winters happen in Nebraska, you get this weird glazing on the sidewalks. And then if you're in the Haymarket and the streets are those bricks, and it's perilous to walk on those bricks when that's happening. So we come down the front steps, and I thought, oh, this doesn't look good, because you can hear that, when that ice falls and it's forming on the streets. So I said, okay, well, let's head over to the station. So we're going, and we're both kind of going, almost falling down. And I said, oh, Paul, here, just give me your arm. Give me your arm. We'll just walk over there. At least I won't fall. You won't fall. Or if we fall, we'll both fall down together. But, so we're going down the street, trying our best not to fall on those slippery bricks. People are in the Haymarket because it's a going place, And they're all coming towards us, all the crowds from the Playhouse. And they're looking at this guy, Paul, looking like he's 6'2" or 3" because of the heels and everything, in drag, hanging on to my arm, and we're walking, trying our best not to fall down, heading over to the station. And there's people just sort of looking, and they're cackling. So he says, I probably don't need a hang. I think I can make it. And I said, Paul, no, it's not safe, and we got to do a show. And I said, besides, I am nothing if not a gentleman. So let's go. So we made it over to the station, did the show. That was one of my favorite Paul moments with me, having that moment with all of these people, doing our own version of a show out there on the streets of the Haymarket. And actually, I just felt really good about being able to get him back out of retirement to that part. But he had a great time. The audience loved it. It was free drinks at the bar. He was really loaded by the end of the evening, and like the rest of the cast. And it was a fun, fun night. Now, the last thing I want to mention, at LET, and I think it might have been one night after we had a performance of All in the Timing, we're sitting there in the theater. The actors had all gone home. Everybody, the audience had all gone home. And it's just the two of us sitting in those chairs, those little sparsely padded chairs that were there. And we're just sitting and we're conversing, just talking, laughing about stuff. And then that lull you get in the conversation where people just aren't saying anything, and we're just sort of quietly being contemplative. And he says, Bob, I've been thinking. And I said, okay. I said, that's probably not safe, but okay. And then we had a laugh over that. And he says, I've decided, he says, that you are crazier, he says, that you are crazier than me. But I'm sicker than you. And I kept that as a compliment in my heart all those years, and I remember it. So it's been a wonderful experience having shared his life and him sharing mine and being able to do what we love together. And so, Paul, I love you. Save me a seat.
Please welcome Karen Jordan Neal.
I'm short. Okay. Hello. Gosh, it's been so amazing to see so many wonderful faces and people that I know, and to share in this time, and to know that we all shared Paul. We all have a piece of him in our hearts, and that's pretty amazing. I'm not really sure when I met Paul. He just has kind of always been there. I think maybe it started out, our friendship started out when I had my vintage clothing store, Second Wind. And he and Kelly Sheridan and some of the folks from the Futs and, various productions that Paul was in, they would come into my store and buy costume pieces and buy props and things like that. And I think that's when it started. But again, he's just kind of always been there. He's always been present. But I think that when we really solidified our friendship was I was working as a director in the Arc of Lincoln Lancaster County, and someone came up with a great idea to do a fundraiser for our organization and a family night event for all of the people that we worked with. And someone said, hey, we should put together a show. And hey, Karen, you've done theater, you know all this stuff. Why don't you find somebody to put together a show for us? How about make it a melodrama, which seems to be a theme tonight, melodrama. And I said, oh, sure, of course I can. I had no idea what to do. But I knew some people in theater, and I called a couple people, and they were like, no, I don't, no. And finally somebody said, well, you ought to call Paul Pearson. And I went, well, duh, of course. So I called Paul, and I said, we're doing this fundraiser thing, and I need somebody to put together a show. And he said, okay, well, who's the audience? And I said, well, it's for the people associated with the Arc of Lincoln Lancaster County. And he said, oh, that's great. I used to work with people. I used to work with the Lomar, and I worked with people with developmental disabilities, so that sounds great. And then he said, well, how much time have I got? And I said, about a month. And he went, oh my gosh. And he said, am I going to get paid? And I said, yes. And he said, I'm in. Okay. He just happened to have a script, which I think was the farmer's daughter one that was just mentioned. He just happened to have that script. And he happened to know a few people who might be interested. He said, yeah, I know some acting people, maybe some people. And he brought in Andy Dillahay. Andy is here somewhere. He was a very young, there's Andy. He was a very young man at that point. And he agreed to give his time to come and do this Miller. And Paul cast our darling Andy as the villain, which was kind of amazing at the time. It was like, wow. And he was fabulous. And so Paul put together this show with these wonderful volunteers. He put together the show in a month, and it was a huge, huge success because Paul made the show very accessible to our audience. Now, people with developmental disabilities, at least at that time, were always told to be respectful and sit in your seat and all of those kinds of things, but this was a Meller, and Paul made it okay and made people enjoy yelling back at the people on stage, yelling at the characters, talking back to them, throwing popcorn. That was really foreign for folks, and they loved it. The show was just an amazingly huge success. Everybody loved it. The people who participated in it thought it was just delightful, and I got to keep my job because I got the show put on, and which was really nice. But more importantly than the amazing success and the magic that Paul made putting that show together was the time that he and I spent not only during the show, the rehearsals and all that sort of time, but we spent hours upon hours after the rehearsal when everybody went home. We would sit in my office at the Arc and we would talk. And we would just, Paul likes to talk a little. And we would spend hours talking. And it wasn't about anything big. It was just life stuff. It was just about finances and, meals and relationships. And it was during those hours that I found out about Annie, his beloved Annie, and about his darling girls. And he told me his life story, and I told him mine. And it was during those hours that we sort of wove each other into each other's lives and hearts. And we just stayed there. And our friendship wasn't big and loud and all that, but it was very deep and it was very meaningful. And we carried that with us. Our friendship was, it was just very soulful and comfortable and quiet, if you can believe that. Well, except for his laugh, and except for this one time. Now, fast forward a few years, we all know Paul's history with the community theater and all of that sort of thing. And he had directed Grease at the Pinewood Bowl. He had just directed that. Well, the next year, they were going to do Cats. And it's my understanding the directors asked Paul if he wanted to be involved with Cats. And he said, oh, no, flat out no. because that was not one of his favorite shows. He didn't really like cats very much, so he said no. And so Courtney was asked to be the director, and kind of the rest is history with regard to Pinewood Bowl directors. But they asked me to design the costumes for cats. And I said, okay. Nobody else stepped up right away, and Paul didn't want to be involved in the show, whatever. So I said, sure. I didn't know what I was doing. Sure, I'll do it. And I did, and I started putting it together. I had this great collaboration with Ray from Ray's Tattoos. He airbrushed the costumes, the cats. And Courtney Piccoli had this great idea to create the little wig hats for all the little kittens. We knitted them on these machines. But I was really stuck. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know. I have no idea how to do hair. I have no idea how to do makeup. That's kind of out of my wheelhouse. And I talked to the directors about it, and they said, you know, maybe if you ask Paul, maybe he'll do it for you. What the heck, you know? And I asked Paul, and like I said, cat's not his favorite, didn't want to be involved in it, but my dear Paul, he said yes. And I was so relieved and so excited and so grateful to have Paul doing the hair and makeup. So, phew, we're good. Fast forward, we're doing the rehearsals, we're getting the costumes together. It's late one night. At the end of rehearsal, there's a few of us working in the women's dressing room, which is where we put the costumes together. Paul came in, and he was so excited. He was telling me, he was like, I've got to show you my ideas. I have all these ideas. And I'm like, yay, cool. And he says, I'm going to show you the wigs, and you're going to be so excited. And I'm like, I'm chomping at the bit. I'm like, I got Paul going. We've got this. And he opens up his bags, and he's saying, look, I have this mohawk for Rum Tum Tugger. And I have this purple one for this other character. And I think this one should wear a clown afro. And I was like, oh, no. No. And he looked at me. And I said, no, Paul, remember, we talked about this when we first started. This is one of the first times that a regional theater or whatever is going to be able to do cats. And we talked about the fact that we kind of need to do it like it's done, you know, that people are familiar with, like they're used to the Broadway show. You know, we need to stick with the normal. Yeah. Y'all know. Paul looked at me, and he said, so you just want to copy the original production? Yes. So you just don't want to use any of these that I just brought? And I said, no. And ladies and gentlemen, I saw a side of Paul Pearson I had never seen before. I knew Paul as the kind, gentle soul with a big laugh who could tame the most belligerent child on stage, who could soothe the biggest ego of the biggest diva ever. But this Paul Pearson turned into, you know, Zeus in Hercules in the movie where his hair goes on fire and his eyes bulge out. That is the Paul Pearson that I saw that night. Paul was screaming about art versus entertainment. And you can't give the people what they think they want. You have to give them what they need. And you have to push the envelope. He is screaming. He is throwing wigs. He is kicking over benches. He had the most fascinating hissy fit I have ever seen. Well, there was a few other people in the dressing room, and they just looked at me. They were like, oh, no. And I said, it's okay. It's okay. And they looked at me. They're like, no, it's okay. Just go. Just go. Just go. It'll be fine. And after they left for a little while, in the meantime, Paul is railing and art and entertainment and boring and cats and all of these. And I'm just, the people called me. They're like, do we need to call somebody? I'm like, no, it's good. I'm good. So finally, after a while, I just sat and watched the spectacle. And after a while, he kind of calmed down and he kind of caught his breath. He ran out of steam. And he came over to me and he said, I just don't know what you want. What do you want from me? And I said, Paul, I need you to do normal. I just need you to do what people are expecting. I need you to do the normal thing. And he just shook his head and he said, show me. And I said, okay. And I showed him a picture of the principles that I had printed off, of exactly what they needed to look like. And I said, this. And he was so deflated. And he just kind of took this big sigh. And he said, okay. Now, I don't know what exactly triggered that big, blow up. I don't know if nobody had told him no before. I don't know. I'd never seen it. I don't know. But I really think that it was just asking a little bit much of Paul to be normal, to do the expected, to try to give people what they wanted instead of, he wanted to give them what they needed, not necessarily what they wanted all the time. And it took me a little while to come to that conclusion that that was just so foreign to him, to have to do normal and boring to him. But him pushing the envelope is exactly what we love about him, right? So we just, and then he did the show, and he did boring and normal. The only thing that we did do, that we had a little allowance for Paul, the white cat, she had a cute little sassy bob. But other than that, everybody else, the only one in the show, but we had one that was a tip to Paul that, wasn't a traditional cat helmet, hat, whatever. So he got a little creativity in there for him. But let's see. So yeah, cats, that was quite the interesting thing. But I didn't know how to curb that, but I was so grateful to him for pushing his own envelope and trying to do kind of the boring thing for him. Let's see. That, when I was talking about trying to think about Paul memories and things, there's so many. We all have a million of them, right? If you spend any time with Paul at all, you've got a zillion memories. But we had so many moments of joy and of laughter. And one of the last best memories I have came from a discussion that Paul and my husband Clay had. Now, Paul and Clay are fast friends too. They didn't know each other as long, but they were fast friends. And I think they kind of had a little bit of a bromance going on. And to know Paul and to know Clay, they couldn't be more opposite. They absolutely couldn't be more opposite. Paul would call Clay his favorite redneck, and Clay would call Paul some really offensive things that I won't repeat here, and Paul would just laugh. They would just they would laugh at each other, and it was hysterical. But it was fascinating to watch these two really amazing human beings who were on opposite sides of the spectrum to have conversations and sit and be open and frank and honest, and that was Paul. I mean, he just accepted everybody and could talk to anybody about anything. And well, Clay did the same. He was they were so respectful of each other and had the most amazing conversations. So it was really great to be in the room when they were having those conversations. Anyway, so I was visiting Paul in the hospital, his last bout in the hospital, and Clay couldn't come with me. He was at work, and so we FaceTimed in Paul's room. We FaceTimed Clay, and Clay said he had a question that he wanted to ask Paul. And Clay is the director of Gateway Mall, right over here. And he said, we found this kit in the parking lot of the mall, and I have a question about it. And Paul, you're the guy that can give me the answer. Paul said, okay. Clay said, well, in this kit, it was a duffel bag. We opened the duffel bag and found a long black wig, a woman's wig. We found a series of women's underwear from Victoria's Secret. We found a box with a male penis enhancer. And we found a spray bottle with an unknown substance in it. And we found a half-empty bottle of barbecue sauce. Yeah, so Clay said, Paul, can you shed any light on this for me? You're the guy who would know. And Paul was sitting in his hospital room, and he kind of stopped a minute, and he kind of chuckled, and he said, well, that is one kink whose door I have never dared open. But if you'd been talking teriyaki sauce... That's our Paul. During those last few days when he was in the hospital, I know many of you talked to him, but I spent some good quality time with him too, and we talked about life, and we talked about death and dying. We talked about the pros and cons between palliative care and hospice care and what you should do and how long you're going to be in there and all that kind of stuff. We talked we talked about reality. And he told me he had a really good talk with a pastor who came to the room. And for some of you, that might be interesting. He told me that the pastor gave him some really good answers about questions that he had, which I found fascinating, knowing Paul. He was excited to tell me the story about something that happened to him while he was there. He had a very cute nurse whose name was Mark. And Mark apparently reminded Paul of the Swedish chef from the Muppets. But, so he just was fascinated with this Mark. Well, this Mark nurse had recognized Paul from the Fringe and Tassel. Mark had come to the Fringe and Tassel with his son, and his son needed a mustache or something for some kiddie event, and they had such a delightful time with Paul, of course, and they remembered that and mentioned that to Paul, and Paul was just so tickled that they remembered him, and Mark told Paul that that's a really fond memory that he shares with his son about this great time that they had in the Fringe and Tassel. Paul also told me that Mark had been going up and down the hallways of the hospital trying to find somebody who knew how to tie a tie. And Paul couldn't talk very loud. He was like, and waved Mark down. And Mark brought into the hospital room this gentleman. I think he said he was from Iran. I know he wasn't from this country originally. And I think this gentleman was from part of the housekeeping staff. And the gentleman's daughter was graduating from high school. And the man bought a new suit, and he bought a new tie to wear with the suit. And the man said that he had another tie that he owned, but it didn't match his suit, and he didn't want to wear it with the suit. And it was tied. It was already tied, the tie was. And it was tied by his brother who lived in Iran. And he would never untie it to try to figure out how to tie a tie because that was very special to him and he wanted to leave it tied. And Paul said, oh, of course. And so the man brought the tie in and Paul helped him tie the tie and tried to show him how to do it himself. And the gentleman was so grateful that Paul did this for him. And he said, sir, thank you for your kindness. I will never untie this tie, and I will think of you every time I wear it. Paul told me he was so happy to think about how he played a little part in bringing joy to people's lives. Mark and his son and this gentleman. And he seemed he was pleased, and he seemed kind of incredulous about that. And I said, oh my gosh, Paul, seriously, here you are, you're in your hospital bed, you are doing kind things for these people, and you have impacted so many people over your life. I said, you have made such a lasting impression, you have assisted and become so important to so many people. Just think, you have created so many waves in our community. You have touched so many people's lives through the theater in Lincoln, Beatrice, and beyond, through your presence in the LGBTQ community, and even through the Fringe and Tassel. I said, you have been so important to so many people. And Paul, our larger-than-life friend, that big presence, our buddy Star, he got really, really still. And he got tears in his eyes. He got choked up. And he looked at me with just this amazement in his eyes. And he quietly, really quietly said, wow, I guess I have. And that's my memories of Paul.
I've seen that angry side of Paul, and it's not fun. I never want to see it again. And it is something, Karen, it is something about saying no to him. Yeah, we said no to a costume, and he got really pissed. At any rate. All right. The next presenter we have is Karen, well, you know her as KFW, and Marie Barrett.
I'm KFW.
Hi, I'm Marie, but most of you probably know me as Jamaican Love.
My bestie.
I'm a pest, and I'm proud of it. This is a show that Paul directed, and he bought me this shirt because I didn't get to see it, and I was too busy. My youngest one had just been born 2 years before. So here's our lives with Paul Pearson in 3 acts and maybe an encore.
Act 1, how we met Paul Pearson. I believe the first time I met Paul was here when we did the first Babes in Toyland, and he was Uncle Barnaby, and I was Contrary Mary. And this was in December of 1998. And I believe he and Rhonda Lake decided that we were going to add clowns to the show. I don't like clowns. Clowns scare me. I mean, we seriously brought in the Lincoln clown community. I can't remember what they're called. But they came every night, and I got chased from the stage up, around the audience, and back and around. So, and of course, I know Paul did that to me, but he did it with love.
I met Paul the first time when I walked into Fringe and Tassel. I had just moved into Nebraska, Lincoln, and it was 2001. I was a single mom working for the government with 2 boys. My boys have always loved Halloween. So to hear that there was a real costume shop in Lincoln, Nebraska, okay, I gotta see this. So I go down to downtown trying to figure out how to get there, and I find Fringe and Tassel Park, and I walk into the store, and there behind the counter stood this man with a perfectly coiffed blonde pompadour. He said to me, "What can I do for you?" We talked for about an hour. I thought he was the owner. I didn't find out that he wasn't the owner for about 3 years. Act 2, Paul Pearson, the director.
Yes, I got to be in both Rocky Horrors, 1 and 2. The first time I got to work with Paul as my director was when I got to play Janet Weiss in the first Rocky Horror. And I think the privilege of getting to work with him also as the choreographer both times, and being able to just bring to the stage what was in that mind of Paul Pearson, and him having enough trust in me, and me having lots of trust in him, to be able to bring that magic to the stage, and to be able to share that with all of you, and know that it was just pure fun.
I was lucky enough to have been directed by Paul. I was lucky enough to have helped with costumes when Paul and Miss Phyllis were doing costumes at the Playhouse. I was lucky enough to be taught how to put on certain kind of makeup to enhance my beautiful features, as Paul said. But the first time I auditioned for Paul was in one of his famous Christmas shows. He was the Christmas show director for the Lincoln Community Playhouse for multiple years. And I auditioned for this show, got callbacks, and I thought, great, I'm perfect for the part I want. I wanted to be a teacher in this show. And so we get to callbacks, and he stands up in front of everyone and decides to tell us a story about this wonderful actress that he knew that was a triple threat. And this woman from Lincoln went to California for a cattle call and stood out in the cattle call for hours. The directors and the producers came out and they went, you, and you. All of you, the rest of you can go home. And so she came back and told him the story, and he said, what was that all about? Now, Paul is telling us this story at callbacks. And he said that she told him that when she asked the producer, why did we all just stand out here? And he said, or the producer said to her, because the costume didn't fit. That was one of Paul's favorite lines every time he did an audition. He wanted people to know that just because you didn't get casted didn't mean that you weren't good enough. It didn't mean that you didn't deserve a part. Sometimes the costume just didn't fit. But Deb Wachter and myself and one other person were in the callbacks, and we so wanted to be a part of the show that we decided that we were going to do run crew. And because we had to bring in this huge slide for Santa Claus, Paul decided he was going to make the costumes fit for 3 of us and made us elves. So we got to be on stage after all.
Yay.
Act 3, dinner and a movie.
So Paul and Marie always did dinner and a movie, and I decided that I would love to join them. And the first time I got to do it was in March of 2015, and we did it during St. Patrick's Day because my bestie here is the best cook in the world, and she always makes the corned beef and cabbage, but she made me fish because at that point I was a pescatarian. No longer, but anyways. But the best part about this particular day is this is my first time doing dinner and movie with Paul Pearson. And we watched the movie, The Know Me Song, the Klaus Know Me Odyssey. Some of you know who I'm talking about. But the best part about Dinner and Movie with Paul is not just watching it, but talking about what we saw, what we learned, how it deals with society, and just the magic and the breadth of knowledge this man had would just make you feel so much smarter and more and happier about anything that was going on, and just very thankful for the many, many years that we did Dinner and a Movie together.
I am also going to speak on Dinner and a Movie, but before I mention that, I'd like to say that during the many years that I knew Paul, he and I became so close, we were like two peas in the pod. When he started having his real breathing issues and had to take oxygen, I asked him, "What are you doing for your exercise?" And he said, "I'm doing nothing. I'm going home and I'm just sitting." I said, "Okay, let's do this. Let's go out and let's walk." And he's like, "Walk? I don't want to walk." And I said, "Okay, how about this? On Wednesdays, my sister and I used to just go to the thrift store and just walk around and sort of poke fun of stuff. You want to go to the thrift store with me this Wednesday?" And he said, "What's a thrift store?" And eventually, he agreed. We went to the thrift store, and it became our regular. We went to the thrift store every Wednesday and almost every Friday. We walked, we laughed, we talked, we made fun of hats and things, took pictures, you name it, we did it. But not only that, we went to the Lead Center with Karen, we went to Ross Theater with Karen and Christine, we went everywhere. In fact, there were so many times that we went to eat at House of Hunan, which is no longer here. We'd walk in and they'd go, "Where's the rest of you?" Because we were never apart. I went with him to medical appointments, took him to medical appointments, went with him to all sorts of different things for a good 19 years. And then there was the Dinner and a Movie, our last Dinner and a Movie. This Dinner and a Movie is very bittersweet for me. That morning, I had already decided what I was going to make for everyone. Christine, Karen, and Paul were coming over at the usual time, 5 o'clock. At about noon, I got a phone call from one of my family members. Found out that my brother had just passed away that day. And I cried so hard I couldn't do anything in the house. Luckily, my husband and Gregory were at home, and my husband helped me fix the meal that we were having that evening. And he actually said to me, my husband, "Why don't you call them and tell them not to come?" And I said, "No, this is Dinner and a Movie. And not only is this Dinner and a Movie, it is what my brother would have wanted me to do." So when Paul, Christine, and Karen came into the house, in the front of the house, I told them about my brother passing. And if it wasn't for them and that Dinner and a Movie, I'm not sure I'd be standing here right now. We had the most simple meal: hot dogs, hamburgers. What else did I make?
Tater tots, deviled egg potato salad, cucumbers, tomatoes. Because I take pictures of everything we do.
So, Paul would normally come to Dinner and a Movie. This is the thing. I cooked. Paul brought 3 or 4 videos or VHSs, and we would all get to choose. Well, this one he chose because Christine and Karen had never seen Rosemary's Baby. So, after the hugs and the crying in the front of the house, we set up the DVD of Rosemary's Baby. No, it was on VHS, of Rosemary's Baby. Karen took the pictures of the cover, took the pictures of the food and our plates, and we sat down in the living room and watched Rosemary's Baby. And that was probably the best Dinner and a Movie that we had. Now, because of my brother's passing, I said, let's put off dinner and a movie for a short period of time. This was October 13th, 2019. I'm sure you will all remember what happened in the world in November of 2019. Dinner and a movie never happened again because the world changed because of COVID. Because Paul had to be safe. Paul had to be kept away from people, kept away from crowds. And in my house, there was always a crowd. So there was years that I didn't get to see Paul. That didn't mean that I didn't try to see Paul. That didn't mean that I didn't go over to Paul's when he called me one day and said, Marie, I need coffee. And I have the coffee in the coffee maker, but my cup is too small. This is about 9 o'clock in the morning. Let me tell you something about the thrift stores in Lincoln, Nebraska. They don't open till 10. I didn't have big coffee cups. I went to the thrift store closest to his house, and I sat there for an hour in the parking lot, waiting till the thrift store opened. I bought that man 3 different sizes of large cups, and he had the best coffee that day. Encore.
Yes, that's you.
I have dreams sometimes that become reality. And I had a dream not too long ago about Paul going to heaven. Paul got to heaven, and you saw the clouds, and he was floating, and he heard Gabriel's horn, and he said, this is in my dream. He said, blow that horn, Gabriel. You're my kind of guy. He got to the pearly gates, and they were all aglitter. He pushed them open, and he stepped in, and he said, honey, I'm home. Then he saw St. Peter in a full-length, floor-length, gold chiffon, lame robe with this crown that was so big and sparkled. And if you'll give me a quick second, please. This is what I heard.
Once a Floradora girl, always a Floradora girl.
By this time, Paul had his own crown, which for those of you that don't know, Paul, in the many shows that he did, many competitions that he did as a drag queen, never won a crown. We gave him one at one of our parties at the house for his birthday. We also gave him a paper man that was made of toilet paper and paper towel rolls, because it's what Paul needed at the time. But Paul now has his crown. And I know, like someone said earlier, they are doing the best floor shows up in heaven that you had ever seen.
Please welcome our final invited guest, Wes Staley.
Hi. Oh my gosh. I've been thinking a lot about how our dear Paul left us right in the middle of Pride Month. Forget March, beware the Ides of Pride, perhaps. That is so him. Paul had a hand in shaping so many of us as we came out as queer youth in Nebraska. He was a presence throughout most of my life. My parents took me to the Futs as a child, and they also took me to my first drag show, which was a Buddy Star show at the Q. In high school, I met Paul when he came to Lincoln High to show us how to do beautiful fairy makeup for our production of A Midsummer Night's Dream, and in doing so, he changed the entire trajectory of my life. When I visited him in the hospital 2 days before he died, he was asking me about how my work in tattooing was going, and I was updating him on all of the amazing opportunities I've had with this career in art. He interjected with his classic, selflessly narcissistic gravel, "And I helped." I'm grateful that I was able to tell him, "Yes, you did," because I've maintained for years that I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't have taken the path that I did if it hadn't been for Paul Pearson. Would I have eventually found my way? Sure, maybe. But Paul introduced me to my love of working on skin, although my current medium is far more permanent than the 3D gel he initially taught me how to use all those many years ago. I'm grateful that he always made an effort to include me in various makeup jobs at Pinewood Bowl, which was Cats, at the Playhouse, which was Rocky II, and at the Beatrice Children's Theater, where I helped with James and the Giant Peach and Cinderella. I'm grateful for all the time I got to spend in the car with him, listening to his stories. I'm grateful that I got to work with him at Fringe and Tassel for several Halloween seasons. I'm grateful that I got to perform with him in what turned out to be his final drag show. I'm grateful for the time he took me out to breakfast. I feel so fortunate to have had this fiery, shining, trailblazing queer elder who embraced me for who I am, who supported my art and my drag and my pursuit of self, who not only taught me, but who also learned from me as well. When I was explaining my non-binary identity and even how I realized that I've been quite gender fluid throughout my life, Paul said, quote, "This makes so much sense applied to you. It is also why the they, them pronouns so well and easily fit with you." I think that may have been one of the only times that someone of an older generation understood my pronouns without having to tell me they struggled with the grammar of it all. It was effortless for him because he always just wanted to understand what made people tick. I loved that about him. At the big gay yard sale we had at his house last month, there were a few of us sitting outside swapping Paul's stories. And there was a moment where Molly exclaimed, "Oh my God, I've never met anyone like him." Megan replied, "And you never will." I couldn't possibly fit everything I'd like to say about Paul into a 5 or so minute speech. I imagine every single one of us could go on for hours with Paul's stories. I hope that we never stop talking about Paul. His little nuggets of wisdom and filthy jokes will live on through us for quite some time, I believe. I hope we continue to pass down his legacy to become the queer elders for the youth of today. Paul, I miss you, and I love you. I hope that I continue to make you proud by creating without fear, and I will forever be thankful that you are my friend. Thank you.
I'm still gay, but I got. I just want some of that. Man, that is so weird. Hey, originally, we were going to open up the floor so that you could tell your stories or share some memories of Paul, but we are running a little bit short on time. So we want to make sure that you keep those stories alive. Be sure to share them with others out there as you enjoy some of the fine things that they have out there for you. And we want to thank you very much for being a part of this. And Sam has some closing remarks.
Thank you, Beth.
Well, you're welcome.
Just a couple of thanks that we need to make sure are made to the Playhouse for hosting, to Doorstep Diner for catering, to Jenny, who made some literal screaming cupcakes for us all to enjoy.
Awesome. I mean, they're awesome.
Michael Reinmiller, who is providing videography services tonight. And to everyone who has donated, made purchases, volunteered their time to make the big gay yard sale happen. It means the world to Megan and Molly. As you file out tonight, stop by the tables in the lobby and choose a party favor or two left over from Paul's collection of oddities.
Whoa, no barbecue sauce.
Yeah.
I'll tell you later, sir. Because I know.
It was Beth's bag.
Bitch.
A looping slideshow of photos of Paul from throughout his life will be running here in the theater. If you need a moment to reflect, to just be, you can hang out in here as long as you like. Please, no food or drink in the theater. The same photos will be shown on the screen in the lobby if you want to be out there. There will be some loose prints of photos scattered throughout the lobby and gallery. Find a few you like and take them to keep. Throughout the reception, Michael Reinmiller. Michael, please wave to us. Michael will be moving throughout the space, capturing moments between us all. If you want to record a message in memory of Paul, please find Michael. Our closing song for the program. This is the one song that Paul specifically wanted to be played at his own memorial. A rare, weird, off-kilter rock disco cover of the classic doo-wop song, My Boy Lollipop. Paul told Megan and Molly that this song is how he hopes that he is remembered. Fun, loving, energetic, with a dash of double entendre. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say what I didn't on stage is that Marie and I had the opportunity to actually visit Paul in the hospital the day before he had passed away. And when we left, he said that he was in good spirits and that, he's ready to do other things. But we strongly believe, because we hadn't seen Paul probably for about 3-4 years because of COVID and his illness and stuff, that he needed the closure. So while we were visiting him, we actually explained why we hadn't seen him for those 3-4 years in person, and you could just see the layers of sadness just disappear, knowing that we were always with him and loving him those years, even though we weren't with him physically. And I think that he needed that. And then all the people that visited him and the time that he spent hearing our stories and the love that we had for him, he was ready to go and just not have to be in physical pain and know that we will always remember him and love him forever. We love you, Paul.
Okay. Go for it.
Okay, well, Lola and I, probably the only two here who knew Paul from college. We all went to Doane College and all did theater things, although Paul was certainly a lot more adept and enthusiastic and that kind of stuff than we was. And he was, he and Annie both they were a couple years older, and they were so kind to me. I remember when I was a freshman and dumb and didn't know what I was doing and was trying to do props for a play Paul was working on and didn't know what it was. And I went, Paul, I don't know what I'm doing. It's okay, this is how you do it. And all so simple and easy. And they were both just so wonderful to me. To a lot of folks there. They were great. I know we lost track of them probably we were figuring about maybe 1974, 75 when we went different ways, but always were important people.
I was kind of speculating that some of those years might have been time when he was traveling and performing, traveling, which makes it very difficult to keep old relationships or old friendships intact. That's hard to keep going. I remember being in a production that Paul directed that probably had the largest cast of any production in the 4 years that I was at Doane, and just being really a visionary.
This really, is the Tempest, right?
Yes, the Tempest. That was a remarkable experience.
He was a remarkable person.
Absolutely.
I really adored Paul. We already miss him. I'm just really happy my husband and I got to see him about a week before he died. And we were heartbroken when we found out that the day we were coming he died. So he was just one of a kind. You know, I was in a show with him. I did a show with him. And he always surprised you what he could come up with. Some of it was a little kinky, but we love Paul for it.
Yeah, the hymn is coming over there pretty strongly. That's pretty good. I'm just happy that I got a chance to express, what he contributed to my life, knowing that he contributed so much to so many people, and that he made such an impact. And it was just great hearing other people talk about their experiences, especially his daughters. I remember when they were just itty bitty and we hung out with them at the theater, when during rehearsals, and my kids were the same age, and they just sort of terrorized the theater while we were doing rehearsals and stuff. But it's good to see them now, and I really appreciated hearing their memories. That was great. So anyway. Love you, Paul.
Hi there. My name is Bob's son. At least that's what Paul used to call me. By used to, I mean always. For a while, I wasn't sure if he actually knew my name. Every time I walk into Frisian Castle, hi, Bob's son. Walk on set, hi, Bob's son. No, but a wonderful guy. Always made me feel welcome. Every time I bring a lady friend with me anywhere, of course, the profane came out, and I had to assure my lady friend, oh no, that's just Paul. Trust me, he's one of the good ones. But I mean, he's wild, he's creative, and I learned everything I know about theater from my father, who learned so much through Paul. So, in essence, I guess I learned everything I know from Paul. So, Paul, I miss you, man. You miss your laugh, and even the gross chortles you do. Wish you all the best, wherever you are.
I remember the first time I met Paul. We were having one of those ruckus parties, and I remember a loud knock coming out the door, and I was like, oh, who could that be? And the next thing, I hear the howl. Oh, the howl of the wolf coming. And I knew we couldn't let him in. Oh, but then he was huffing and puffing, and he blew my house made out of sticks right down. Came on in. Oh, but We had just such a ball. We did lines of Coke and drank until the morning. I have never had so much fun listening to Bette Midler. I tell you, that was a night to remember.